Today we got something special. We're going to talk about martingale systems. It's the mother of all martingales video. Some might say it's a Martingale-palooza. Well, what's the deal with martingale systems? Well, they're an attempt to take a game with a mathematical house advantage and through proper betting, make this game into a winning game for the player. And one of the things I want to say up front is these sims are long sims. They're from 100,000 to 1,000,000 sessions. And each of those sessions, in terms of the simulation, has a starting bankroll and a goal. And so the simulation is going to continue until the bankroll either reaches the goal or you lose everything. And I wanted to comment because there's a lot of videos out there on betting systems, and in particular on roulette, but also on craps and other games. And these betting systems typically just show you a few hands and say, well, here's what you should expect, or here's kind of how it goes. And just looking at a few hands or a few spins or a few rolls of the dice is not enough. It's not enough to evaluate or analyze a betting system. You need to be looking at these systems over the course of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of spins, millions of plays. The only realistic way of doing that is through a computer simulation. So all of these computer simulations are based on code that I wrote. And let's take a look at what they have to tell us in terms of long run and actual results under conditions that are more than just a few spins. In any scientific approach, we like to take a baseline, which is we want to just understand what is kind of the norm, if you will, or what's something that we can take our data and put it in context in of what we know, what we're familiar with, might be considered a baseline. And so in this case, our baseline is just going to be a one-to-one flat bet. We're just going to pick a wager that pays even money or one-to-one, and we're just going to flat bet it. So it might be in roulette, it might be red, it might be even. In craps, it might be the pass line. In Bach, it might be the player bet, for example. And the steps are really simple on this. And these are algorithmic steps. And they're the steps that you would do at a crap table or at a roulette wheel. But they're also the same type of steps that when I code these games up in terms of the computer simulation, these are the steps that the software uses. So in this particular case, you're just going to repeat the same 1 unit bet on any wager you want. And it doesn't matter if you win or lose the bet, you're just going to repeat the same 1 unit bet. And I also want to point out that I like to speak in terms of 1 unit bets, but that 1 unit can be whatever you would like. It could be $1, it could be $5, it could be $100. Let's take a look at even money wagering and flat betting on roulette. So even money bets are 1 through 18, even, black, red, odd, and 19 through 36. On each of these bets on a double zero wheel, 18 numbers win for us and 20 numbers lose, in part because of the zero and double zero. Let's go ahead and just flat bet one on black.
Two black, even. You win! Place your bets, please.
So this particular app says you win $2, but it includes the dollar I wagered. So it was a net gain of 1 unit because these are one-to-one paying bets. Now with flat betting, I always bet the same amount. I'm always going to bet $1. Doesn't matter if I win or lose. So let's go ahead and make another bet on red this time.
7 red odd. You win! Place your bets, please.
So I won another $1. This baseline wagering system, just flat betting on an even money bet, looks like. Well, here's what the results look like, the actual sim results. And so what's plotted here is this is your bankroll on the left-hand side. And this particular sim started with $1,000 bankroll. The goal was to get to 2,000. Obviously, if you go bust, you've lost everything and the sim is over if you reach zero. And so the vertical axis here goes from 1,000 to 0. The horizontal axis is number of plays. And you can see that this intercepts, this is a double zero wheel, and this intercepts on average maybe somewhere around 19,000 here. And that's what you would expect. If you start with a bankroll of 1,000 units and you're wagering 1 unit, you're just flat betting that 1 unit, you're not varying it at all, then on a double zero wheel, the house advantage is 5.26%, or exactly 1/19. So for each unit you wager, you expect to lose 1 over 19 units. So after roughly 19 spins, you would lose 1 unit, and after roughly 19,000 spins, you would lose 1,000 units. And that's what you see here in this particular graph. Start with 1,000 units. This thing these all have the same general kind of downward slope. You're losing bankroll, you're losing money here as this comes down. And they're going to differ in terms of how many spins it takes for you to lose everything. But on average, they're going to be around 19,000 or so here. And remember, these are actual Monte Carlo simulations, so these are actual random results as produced by a computer. And so you're not going to end up at exactly 19,000 spins. You're going to, on average, end up there, but you might last a little bit longer, and you might actually do a little bit worse than that. And so that's what these sims suggest. But you can see also that it's relatively low volatility. These are mostly on a line, and it's mostly a downward trajectory. Let's turn to the Classic Martingale. And the Classic Martingale is a system that was devised so that after a string of losses, hopefully you can recoup all your losses and actually gain a unit once you finally win. And so the way it works is, if you will, you start with the wager of 1 unit. You make this on a 1-to-1 wager, for example, pass in craps or the red bet in roulette. And after every loss, you double your wager. And after every win, you just go back to step 1 and you start with a wager of 1 unit. So in terms of the goal, if you will, what is the goal of the system? Well, the overarching goal is to turn a game that has a house advantage into something that you can win at. It fails in that goal. You cannot take a game that has a house advantage mathematically and somehow manipulate your bets to overcome the house advantage. So the Classic Martingale does not do that. But the goal, if you will, or what's behind this, is that when you eventually win, you're going to net 1 unit plus 1 unit for that sequence. And so, for example, if we lose 1, we have to double that bet, then we bet 2. If we lose that 2, then we double the bet again and we bet 4. And if we lose that 4, then we double the bet again and we bet 8. And if we win that 8, so we finally won at the end of the sequence, you'll see that since we've won 8, and prior to that we lost 1, 2, and 4, which is the sum of which is 7, we've actually netted plus 1 unit for the sequence. Let's take a gander now at the Martingale. In the Martingale system, I'm going to begin by betting 1 unit, so let's go ahead and bet on 1 through 18. What happens?
27 red odd. Place your bets, please.
That was a loss of 1 unit. After every loss in the Martingale, I double my bet. So now I've got to bet 2 units. Let's go ahead and just bet them on 1 through 18 again. See what happens.
16 red even. You win. Place your bets, please.
So again, it says I won $4, but that includes the $2 I wagered. So my net win on that last spin was $2. In that sequence, it was a short sequence of 2 spins. It was a loss of 1 unit, followed by a win of 2 units. So for the sequence, I gained 1 unit. And that's the point of the Martingale, is that when you win, if you win, hopefully if you win at the end of the sequence, you will recoup all your losses and end up with a net gain of 1 unit. Well, the Classic Martingale in terms of computer output looks something like this. And you can see here that if we start with a bankroll of 1,000 units, which is what this particular sim was, when we gain a unit, win, 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 win. So we actually won the first 5 spins here. And then we wagered a unit and we lost. So then we've got to up to 2 units and we lost that one. And then we got to up to 4 units and we lost that one. But then we got to up to 8 units and we won that one. So we won everything back from this string of losses and actually ended up at 1 unit higher, 1 unit higher here than we did going into the string of losses. And you can see that these dips can be rather substantial, but that essentially it's a system that looks something like this. And again, I want to comment that if you only look at a few spins of this system, you might say, well, it's working. It's an upward trajectory generally here. But we really need to look at the bigger picture. We need to look at a longer simulation than just a handful of spins to make a determination. And this is what the simulation results look like for several of the series of simulations. In this particular one, the simulation is again starting at 1,000. The goal is to get to 2,000, so it will stop if it reaches 2,000. And on the other hand, if it reaches 0, you've lost everything, you've gone bust, it's going to stop as well. So you can see here that this general kind of upward trajectory that we saw does kind of take place, and you see it basically in all of the systems kind of have this when things are going well, so to speak, for you in the martingale. But the risk in the martingale is that you're going to encounter this situation where you have this catastrophic loss. You can see it here on the purple, where you lose 1, then you lose 2, then you lose 4, then you lose 8, then you lose 16, then you lose 32, then you lose 64, and you're starting to wager big amounts of money chasing that 1 unit win, and you may not win. So that's what these particular parts of the graph that show that the amount just continues to go down and then you go bust. Those are successive losses where you never did win. You can see here on this purple guy, he had a series of losses and ultimately did win. So he started his upward trajectory again, then had a series of losses and again ultimately did win. And he got close here to the goal. He was really close, around 1,800 units out of 2,000. But then he had a series of losses that was catastrophic and he lost everything. On the other hand, sometimes you do reach the goal. The yellow player here and the green player both reach the goal. And so in these sims, you can see kind of a bigger picture of what you're likely to see in terms of bankroll fluctuations. And let me just remove myself briefly here so you can see the yellow and the green player, but you can see that they do win here, up here, that they reach the goal of 2,000. And so one of the keys to running simulations and one of the benefits is you can see the bigger picture instead of just looking at a few spins that don't really tell you much. You look at the bigger picture. What are you likely to face? What are the fluctuations you're likely to see with your bankroll? And this is evident here in this particular graph of the output of the simulations of the Martingale system. Well, let's turn to the Grand Martingale. If you thought the Martingale was not volatile enough for you, and you really wanted to amp it up and really wanted to go aggressive and kind of a hyper aggressive system, the Grand Martingale is it. The steps in the Grand Martingale are you start with a wager of 1 unit on, again, a 1-to-1 bet like pass line, player bet in Bach, 1 through 18 in Roulette. And after every loss, your new wager is not now double like it would be in the Martingale. It's double plus an extra unit. And you might think that's not much, but it is, and we'll see this in the results. And if you win, again, you're going to go back to step 1. So it is even more aggressive. And the goal is not just to win 1 unit per sequence. Remember, in the Martingale, at the end of a sequence, if you win at the end of a sequence, you will have netted plus 1 unit for that whole sequence. The Grand Martingale is even more aggressive. It wants to win 1 unit for every spin. And I've actually not seen this highlighted in documentation I've seen online about the Grand Martingale, but this is what it does if it's succeeding. And it only succeeds if you get to that win at the end of the sequence. So for example, if you lose 1 unit, your first bet is a loss. Then you've got to go 2 times that plus 1. So your next bet's going to be 3. And if you lose that, then you got to go 2 times that 3 plus 1. So your next bet's going to be 7. And if you lose that, then you've got to go 2 times 7 plus 1, which is 15. And if you win that, you'll win the 15 units. And if you do the math here, for these 4 spins in the sequence, we've lost 1, then 3, and then 7. So we've lost 11, then we win 15. So we've gained 4 units for the sequence. And it took exactly 4 spins. And so we can characterize the goal, if you will, or one of the features of this system is that you actually net plus 1 unit per spin, provided that at the end of the sequence you have a win. Now, to take a game that has a mathematical house advantage against you, 5.26%, let's say in roulette, or even 1.414% in craps, just some positive number, the house has a mathematical advantage. And to bet only 1 unit at the start of your system, but for every sequence, to expect to win 1 unit per play of that sequence, I hope you can appreciate that's a really, really aggressive system. And this system, like the Martingale, does not turn roulette or craps or Bach into a winning game for you. It does not change the house advantage from being something the house enjoys to something that you enjoy. Um, let's take a closer look at the play. Let's go ahead and look at the Grand Martingale. It's a hyper-aggressive betting system. It's even more aggressive than the Martingale. Begins with, again, picking one of these even money bets. Let's go ahead and let's pick this one black, and we're going to bet 1 unit.
23 red odd. Place your bets, please.
So after a loss in the Grand Martingale, I double my bet and add 1. So now I've got to bet 3 units. So let's go ahead and put 3 units on black.
24 black even. You win. Place your bets, please.
So my net win on that second spin was $3 because that was my wager. So for the sequence of 2 spins, I lost 1 and then I won 3. And so I had a net gain of 2 units. And again, in the Grand Martingale, one of the points or one of the facets of it is that you win a net of 1 unit on every spin. So for those 2 spins, that sequence of 2 spins, I just won 2 units. Okay, we've seen how roulette plays on a roulette wheel. Now we're going to take a look at spin by spin what the computer sim results look like. And you can see here, this is actually a really interesting one, and it shows how aggressive this system is, that you're just kind of merrily going along here at 1,000 units of bankroll, a little dip here and you recover quickly. And you're still hanging out at near 1,000, and you can see in just a handful of spins here, you've gone bust. And I found this really fascinating that this happened so quickly at the beginning of the simulation. I mean, literally 21 spins in, you're done, you've lost the bankroll. Whereas about 15 spins in here, you're still hovering around 1,000. And so those are the kinds of fluctuations that you're going to experience in something as volatile as the Grand Martingale. Uh, this was such a quick demise that I actually wanted to take a closer look at the first 21 spins or so here. And what you can see happen, this is just a close-up of what we just looked at. So this is that initial dip that then recovered, which in the grand scheme of things was this. But then you can see that we actually became very slightly profitable here and then went into this catastrophic decline. So this was spin 15, spin 16, and you've got to go back to this other scale here to appreciate that this is 15 and 16. And then because we keep doubling our wager and adding a unit, we just quickly crash down to 0. What do the overall results look like? Well, they look like this. They're similar to the Martingale, as you might expect. But on the other hand, they also come crashing down more quickly if you do not experience a win. In other words, if you experience a successive series of losses, you don't need as many losses. You lose your entire bankroll in the Grand Martingale because you're wagering more aggressively than you are in the Classic Martingale. And that would be exemplified by this very first graph here. The one in purple is the one we just looked at, which lost the entire bankroll in 21 spins. Generally an upward trajectory, because if you do have a win at the end of a sequence, you are gaining units. The slope of this upward trajectory is a greater slope than the Martingale because it's more aggressive. But again, like I said, but if you lose, the loss is even faster. And so this would be a situation, this purple one, where the person lost most of their bankroll, did recover at the end, won that last bet here. Now, the reason they didn't go all the way back up to the line is they didn't have enough to wager here. So the computer simulation only wagers what you have. And if you're near the top, it only wagers what you need to reach the goal so that you don't take more risk than you need to. So here they wagered what they had left, the purple player. They won and then proceeded kind of on this upward trajectory, encountered a couple losses that were substantial, but ultimately reached the goal. Let's take a look now at the reverse martingale. The reverse martingale has basically the opposite philosophy. You start with a wager of 1 unit, which is the same as the other martingales, but now you're going to double your wager after a win. In the classic martingale, you double your wager after a loss. So this is really the opposite philosophy. And if you lose, you're going to go all the way back to step one. So if you remember contrasting this with the classic martingale, in the classic martingale, step two would be after a loss, you double. And step three would be after a win, you go to step one. This is completely reversed it. And that's why it's known as the reverse martingale. It's also called the opposite or the anti-martingale. Uh, the goal is that you're going to ride winning streaks here, and you hope to frankly ride a winning streak to your goal. And so this would be a sequence you might see. You might win a unit because you always start with one unit. And now, because you've won, you're going to double. Because you win that, you're going to double again. You get to 8 and you lose. And so you can see for the sequence, you've lost a unit. And that's true for every sequence here in the reverse martingale. Just as in the classic martingale, if you win at the end of a classic martingale sequence, you will have recouped all your losses and gained 1 unit. If you lose at the end of a reverse martingale sequence, you will have lost everything you gained up until that point and lost 1 extra unit. And you can see that here. So the loss was 8 units after wins of 1, 2, and 4. And so it really is an opposite kind of mind think, an opposite philosophy from the martingale. And because it's so opposite, you might say, well, they can't both be true. And you would be right. I mean, if somebody says to you that, that because this isn't true, then the opposite must be true. Well, that's not true either, right? And so let's take a look at reverse martingale in action. The reverse martingale is kind of the opposite of the martingale. It's sometimes called the anti-martingale. You begin by wagering 1 unit.
10 black, even. You win. Place your bets, please.
So I won a net of 1 unit. So now I actually increase my bet. Let's go ahead and just bet on red. We're going to put 2 on red.
32 red, even. You win. Place your bets, please.
So I won 1 unit and then 2 units. So I'm going to double up to 4 units. Let's bet on black.
27 red, odd. Place your bets, please.
I lost that last bet. And in the reverse martingale, what happens in a sequence is you're hoping for a string of wins, streak of wins. Anytime you lose, any wins you had will be gone, and you will have a net loss of 1 unit for the sequence. Kind of the opposite of the martingale, where you have a net win of 1 unit for the sequence. The reverse martingale looks like this in terms of the computer output. You can see here that if the first spin is a win, so we've gone to 1001, now we bet 2, and if we win that, we've gone to 1003, and then we bet 4, and if we win that, we've gone to 1007, and so on and so forth. But at the end of a sequence, the final outcome is a loss. Then we go all the way back down to a point that's 1 below where we started this sequence at. And so the general trajectory here is downward. And again, the goal of the system is that you would string together a series of wins, concatenate, if you will, a series of wins, so that that would propel you up to your goal. And these are some representative simulation results for 5 different players. And you can see here that there's generally this downward trajectory in the reverse martingale. And again, you can reach your goal. It does happen. It requires a string of wins that does not end in a loss. It's just a series of wins that come together and get you to your goal. And because you're upping your bet after each win, it doesn't require a lot of wins, but it does require a string of wins. Otherwise, you're just kind of on this downward trajectory. Well, now I want to summarize and look at not just 1,000 to 2,000, but different starting bankrolls, different goals, and frankly, different games with different house advantages. How do these systems do? So you can see here right away that if we're looking at roulette and a 00 wheel at 5.26%, flat betting, really, because it's very low volatility and the house is just kind of grinding out a win against you. As we looked at, if you remember, the lines were just kind of straight linear lines coming down. There's really not much of a chance that you'll win. We looked at 1,000 to 2,000. That actually is 0%. So you actually have no chance, effectively, of ever doubling your bankroll before losing it all. On the other hand, if you start with 100 units and you want to get to 150, you start to get a small chance. If you start with 100 units and you only want to get to 125, you have about a 7.2% chance. And so what the Martingale and the Grand Martingale and the Reverse Martingale really do is, I think, kind of implicitly, they acknowledge there's a house advantage. You're not going to grind it out. Like in flat betting, you're just not going to get it done. So what the Martingale systems do is they're increasing your volatility through wagering. They're, in a sense, they're kind of trying to give you a chance to reach your goal before losing everything. But of course, that comes with additional risk in the sense that you'll generally not be playing as long. The flat bet for you to lose 1,000 units, as we looked at, will take about 19,000 spins. It will be substantially less in each of these systems because you're on average wagering much more and losing on average much faster. But they do give you a chance of reaching your goal. So, for example, in the Martingale, 1,000 to 2,000, you would have about 27.4% chance of succeeding. The Grand Martingale is even more volatile. It's even more aggressive. So you have a little bit higher chance. And the Reverse Martingale is kind of in between. So one of the things to take away from this chart is if we look at each group of three here, what we see is that it's always easier to go from 100 to 200 units. In other words, to gain 100 units starting with 100 is easier than it would be to gain 1,000 starting with 1,000, or to gain 10,000 units starting with 10,000 if we're wagering 1 unit each time. It's just the grind makes it harder and harder. So this group of three, you can see that down here. The same is true for 100 to 150. It's easier to do that than 1,000 to 1,500, which is easier than 10,000 to 15,000. And again, this is wagering 1 unit. And again, down here, you see the same pattern, and it's the same pattern everywhere in this chart. And that's just generally true. If you're playing a game where your expectation as a player is negative, I expect to lose, it's going to be easier for me to take a given bankroll. If I'm trying to increase it by, let's say, 100%, it's easier for me to go from 100 to 200 than it is from 10,000 to 20,000 if I'm wagering 1 unit each time. The other thing to take away from this is that it's easier for me to do 100 to 125. For example, if I look at the Grand Martingale, my chance of that is 74%. That's easier than 100 to 150. That's harder. Now I'm trying to gain 50 units. And if I'm trying to gain the 100 units, that's even harder still. So everything kind of is in the correct direction we would expect from simulations, from actual results of these systems. And what these do is they give you a chance of reaching your goal. You can see that. It's quite a bit different than this value here in this column, our baseline. But nevertheless, they never quite get to what would be considered fair. And what's fair here is if the game has no house advantage. So if the game had no house advantage, and I started with 100 units and I was trying to get to 200, then I would have a 50% chance of reaching 200 before I lose it all. In other words, I would have a 50% chance of ending with 200 and a 50% chance of ending with 0. And that would be a fair game. I had a 50% chance of plus 100 and a 50% chance of minus 100. You can see that if you add those together, that's 0. And you can see that all of these values in these systems are below this 50% mark. They don't get there. So they do not turn a game that has a house advantage into something that has a player advantage. They don't get there. The next group of three, you're trying to increase your bankroll by 50%. So if we think about that, so if we have, let's say, 100 units and we're trying to get to 150, we're trying to gain 50 units, what would be fair? What would be fair? Well, what would be fair is if 2/3 of the time we gained 50 and 1/3 of the time we lost 100. Because 2/3 times plus 50 is plus 33.3. And 1/3 of losing 100 times minus 100 is minus 33.3. And so if you add those up, you get 0. And you can see again that the systems here are always below the 66.7 value. And lastly, if we try to be a little less aggressive and only gain 25% of our bankroll, so we're willing to risk a bankroll, our entire bankroll, to grow it by 25%, which is somewhat modest. And you can see that the fair guideline in that case is 80%. So 80% of 25 units is 20. And 20% of losing 100 units is minus 20. And so those offset, that's fair. And again, you can see that these systems do not get you to the 80%. And in fact, mathematically, they must be below 80% because there's a house advantage. And so this would be a summary of the roulette martingales. Let's look at craps. In craps, the pass line wager there, we're not looking at odds here, but the pass line wager itself, it has a house advantage of 1.414%, which is the same house advantage in the come bet. It would be applicable to either of these. And here I'm only going to look at starting bankrolls of 100. So if I want to get to 200 and I apply the martingale, the grand martingale, and the reverse martingale, you can see that I'm getting closer to this 50% fair guideline. And the main reason for that is the house advantage is smaller here. In roulette, it's 5.26%. In craps, it's 1.41%. So it's closer to zero, and hence these results are closer to what's fair. And you can see that's true if for trying to raise my bankroll from 100 to 150. I'm a little closer to this fair value. And the same is true for if I'm less aggressive and I'm only trying to go from 100 to 125. You can also see that flat betting here, actually, I have what looks to be a reasonable chance of kind of getting there. And again, that's because the house advantage in craps is less. Look at Baccarat. Baccarat, the player wager, has even less of a house advantage, 1.235%. So you can see that if you compare these values to those immediately prior, they're all a little bit higher and in Bach, as they should be. But again, these never reach the fair guideline because there's still a mathematical house advantage. Because we've been looking at situations where the house has the advantage, I thought it would be interesting to look at things a little bit what I call card counter-esque. Some of you may know that Ken Fuchs and I are the authors of Knockout Blackjack. It's a card counting system, very simple system that we invented some time ago and wrote a book on. And so in card counting, the idea is that I'm keeping track of cards already played, and those will affect the cards left to be played. In other words, I'm keeping track of what I've seen. There's an unplayed pack yet to be seen, but the information here gives me information about what's left to be played. And I can identify situations where I have the advantage and situations where the house has the advantage. When I have the advantage, I'm going to bet more, maybe bet a lot. When the house has the advantage, I'm going to bet less, maybe not bet at all. And so overall, then the overall advantage for the game swings into my favor. And so this simulation here is not exactly what a card counter would see because a card counter just is not always even money. Blackjacks pay 3-2. Don't play 6-5 games. Blackjacks pay 3-2 if you're a card counter. And you may double down or split. Also, as we just talked about, the house advantage is kind of constantly fluctuating in blackjack. This particular simulation assumes it's constant at minus 1%, so the player has a 1% advantage. But the results are very interesting and should give you hope in terms of games where you can have an advantage over the house. So one of the things to see is that right away that each of the Martingale systems now is above the fair guideline. And that's because we have the advantage as a player. Because we have the advantage, we're always above 50%. For this row, we're always above 66.7% for this row, and we're always above 80% if we're only trying to increase our bankroll by 25 units. Another interesting thing is the flat bet here actually outperforms, in each case, all of the Martingales. And if you'd like more information about why this might be so, and is so, please, you might want to look at a video of mine called Double or Bust, where the idea is how should you best approach doubling your bankroll. If your goal is to double before you go bust, how should you approach that? And one of the conclusions in that video is that if you have the advantage as a player, you want to stretch out your plays. You actually want to have a large number of trials. That maximizes your chance of doubling. But if you don't have the advantage, you want to minimize the number of trials. You actually want to put it all on one shot. And so this is represented here in this particular chart by flat betting. Now, what's the way to maximize my trials? Well, my minimum unit is 1 unit. And in these simulations, and I can't go lower than that. So flat betting 1 unit is the best I can do. It's the longest I can stretch things out. And so that's why this flat betting in this situation outperforms the martingales, because the martingales are trying to be more volatile, trying to get more money on the table. And in this particular simulation, unlike real card counting, um, your player's expectation is constant at plus 1%. So it's better for you to actually stretch things out. Now, in actual card counting, when your advantage goes up, you want to bet more because you have more of an advantage. But in this simulation, your advantage is constant at 1%. And so flat betting outperforms these martingales. I hope you enjoyed this video and the simulation results and some of the conclusions that we've drawn from this. In particular, that martingale systems are quite volatile, and you may think you're doing well in them, but it may take just a few spins in the martingale and the grand martingale for you to completely go belly up and be bust. On the other hand, the reverse martingale requires a string of wins, successive wins that does not end for you to reach your goal in a bankroll. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I enjoyed making it. If you enjoyed this video or my channel, please consider subscribing, and we'll talk again soon. Take care.